All right. I want to give an introduction to everybody. I'm a assistant faculty, teaching faculty at Carnegie Mellon University and Software and Societal Systems Department in the School of Computer Science, as well as in Electrical and Computer Engineering in the College of Engineering. I'm also a director of a nonprofit called Community Forge. And I basically want to talk a little bit today about, what projects I'm up to at Carnegie Mellon and my work in general that specifically involves ethics and technology, which is sort of my main focal point. So to begin with, I have kind of four branches of what I'm doing at Carnegie Mellon. Plus, of course, as I brought up, I also have this community service work where I run a nonprofit that does equitable economic development work in the region and some of the distressed areas outside of the city of Pittsburgh. And so that does feed into a lot of this and is a good background to understand about what I do and sort of why I'm coming in with, I think, the perspective to do ethics well in the context of engineering. I do have a engineering background. My PhD is computer science, and I have a machine learning kind of technical background. But my PhD work ended up being about communicating ethics to various stakeholder populations. So you're going to hear a lot about that and how that's kind of evolved into the work I'm doing at CMU and then some research work. So to begin with, I'm going to talk a little bit about ethics pedagogy, which is kind of the forefront of my work as a teaching faculty. So to begin with, I'm designing new courses. I currently manage the largest ethics course in the School of Computer Science. It's called Ethics and Policy Issues in Computing. I took over that course in 2020 and have been developing it to be a really high quality, more like central node in this ecosystem of courses around social impacts and technology. And now my goal in coming in as a new faculty is to develop some new courses that continue to teach practical ethics for engineers. And I'm also very interested in how that relates to people's personal values. So I do have a very practical version of ethics I'm teaching. It's very different than what you're going to find in a philosophy or department or business school, where we're either worried about theory or we're worried about case studies specifically. I, of course, do teach a lot of case studies and what's been going on in industry. But I am also very focused on building people the practical skills to enact and bring about ethics in their discipline without being prescriptive, but more, how do you discover your personal values? How do you translate those personal values into technical decisions? How do you translate them into organizational processes and decisions? So these are very hands-on courses with a lot of engagement, a very active learning style. So currently one course, and I do a lot of these guest lectures, which kind of gets into goal 3 here on the slide. I also support a lot of other professors in bringing ethics into technical curriculum. So at this point, I've done about 32 course infusions over my time at Carnegie Mellon already, and looking to systematize those more, meaning that a course that is a technical course already could be a machine learning course, could be a robotics course, could be a stats course. And how do we bring an ethics module or a day where we really talk about social impacts or ethical thinking or responsible thinking in those disciplines? So I have a plan to build a couple new courses around a studio for ethics and engineering, where students are actually working with hands-on projects and looking at them through lenses of ethics, and then making decisions and doing analysis about what you would do implementation or deployment wise. And I'm also looking to do some other kinds of engaging courses, including things like experiential learning out in the community with stakeholder populations, as well as some debate courses and courses that get students the chance to talk about and think about some of these bigger questions, both in terms of industry writ large, new emergent technologies, or even career decisions and sort of that personal value space as well. Another goal here in ethics pedagogy is eventually for all this to fold together in a minor track for engineering ethics. So we're seeing more and more young people who really do care about ethics and are concerned about the ethics of this discipline. And I want to have a way that those students can have a more formalized approach to being supported in signaling that they want that to be a key part of their career, and gaining the skills and exposure to the right information and curriculum that allows them to truly kind of feel that they have a central understanding of ethics for this technical context. So this is some of the stuff I'm doing in the ethics pedagogy space. So moving on, the next phase of this is a project I'm calling the Hopeful Engineering Network. And so Hopeful Engineering Network is kind of a, you know, really an extension of this work that's happening in the classroom, where I have been meeting more and more students in my few years of teaching already ethics courses here and even in other universities, seeing that young people are really becoming more magneted to like think, how do I actually think about doing this in light of my career? I have to make career decisions. I'm going to have to get a job. You know, I'm taking out student debt, but I also do really care about this stuff. What does it look like to think about and cultivate a plan for myself? And so what I've learned over time is that really there's no, like, you can't just give a roadmap, or there's no one-time advising strategy you can just do and then students know what to do. These are hard decisions, formative things, and also things that need to be discussed with various levels of people, advisors and mentors, peers, as well as professionals who can have realistic conversations about what the industry is actually going to be like. So the Hopeful Engineering Network is kind of the platform, a student experience platform that is meant to give those students who really want to do public interest careers and want to really bring their values into their careers and think about maybe non-traditional pathways into being a technologist, and potentially, or be like advocates for particular values or issue spaces they care about in their technical careers. So what that network hopes to do is first be that platform for career planning, and be a place where you can have like peer-to-peer support, like meet others who are thinking about these issues, have things like workshops, speaker series, basically being ongoing community of people who are actively saying, I'm trying to do public interest work upon graduation, or I'm trying to be really a steward of environmentalism. I'm worried about climate change, or I'm really worried about bias issues and fairness in machine learning. I'm really worried about, you know, the nature of automation, how that's going to change the workforce and what rights workers need, and what technical things can we be doing in that space to support workers, you know, varieties of areas. There's more than could be listed, privacy, et cetera. Meet other students, meet industry experts, meet academic experts, have a space cultivated for that. Then second, actually get an affiliate network of mentors, people who are saying, I will give a couple hours a year to talking with a student who really is passionate about my area. You know, someone, say, who's worked in a green tech startup or started one, maybe somebody who's worked in the FTC or the government and has some perspective there. That way, students who are starting to build these trajectories can get a chance to actually talk to somebody in that real professional community. Finally, goal 3 is, and this is a little bit more of a phase 2 goal of this network, is I would also like to help young entrepreneurs in alternative corporate structures. We have a lot of entrepreneurial thinking students, which is excellent here at Carnegie Mellon. I'd like to help some of them who have appropriate ideas and appropriate benefit, you know, statements for what they're really trying to do with their technology, help them with like things like nonprofit and B Corp structuring. So that's like a goal, is to have a potential small living lab or a small incubator of students who can pitch and then get maybe funds or support of some way, resources to build projects that are not traditional for-profit equity investment tech companies, but potentially are more positioned to be about public impact and public benefit. So now moving a little more to like the research side of where I support researchers and what research I do. A big area for me is technology governance. So tech governance starts with, you know, developing risk models and social impact forecasting for emergent and highly uncertain technologies, right? We have new things, whether it's LLMs, which have been, you know, in diffusion models, these generative AI systems that have become extremely popular, extremely controversial also, along with other things, from whether it's medical AI technology, robotics within the medical context, medical device industry, bioinformatics, CRISPR technologies. There's a lot of revolutionary and potentially really transformative technologies. But as we've already seen in the rollout of the past, like about 10 years of some really powerful new technologies that are mostly being deployed online and through mobile applications, you know, things in the social media space, algorithms that are gluing young people to screens. We've seen mental health consequences. We know there's a lot of risks and social impacts. This is a space that I'm you know, feel very equipped and interested to be able to work with researchers to identify what are these risks that are upcoming in emerging technologies. What are the potential societal impacts we want to avoid? What are the ones we want to lean into? How do we mitigate those risks as we lean into the benefits that we want from technology? So I'm interested in helping build those models and those forecasts that allow us to see how potentially the way this technology gets deployed or goes out in the real world can create or maybe restrain risk. Second is then actually building model policy and regulatory safeguards, really working with people who are in government or in the policy space to think about what actual enforcement and what meaningful policy looks like that protects from the risks that we, are forecasting and talking about in what I was just saying before. So modeling policy and actually working with policymakers, legislators, enforcement agencies like the FTC. This is another area of interest that kind of falls out of doing the risk modeling. And finally, for the more technical and kind of an industry perspective, or in the researcher perspective, I'm also interested in deployment policies and processes that increase safety and minimize risk. So if you are going to be putting say a medical AI company or a medical company developing an AI, and you want to start putting this in the practitioner space, what sort of governance tactics can actually go into, whether it's human in the loops or validation processes, or what information does the user need to have to make the best decisions. So these are the sort of like companions to the technology that allow for the highest level of potential benefit and the lowest level of risk, ideally, in the deployment setting. So finally, last sort of pillar of my work is public communication. So I have been over the past several years doing a lot of like translational work, which kind of gets to that even into that model policy work that I was just talking about, but really like, how do we talk about issues that are intersectional between ethics, law, technology, social emotional factors, community and vulnerability and marginalization factors? How do we think about these things in the technology space? Because what we see is that often we're being reactive and people aren't able to like advocate or see things coming. And in part of that's because you have an expert discourse happening in academia and in industry, where people who are highly trained specialists are building these systems, but the systems are ultimately being rolled out to be used by millions, if not billions, of people who may or may not understand how their values, how the way that they want to raise their children, what their privacy expectations are, et cetera. How do those actually make sense in that technical system that they're being now asked to use, or maybe even being forced to use, say, in a workplace setting? So I'm very interested in doing translational writing work that helps people sort of see how, okay, this technology that you're using actually contains these sort of choices, trade-offs, and costs to your potential social interests and values. Or how are those being operable and occurring inside of the technology itself? So that translational writing that I'm talking about is a lot technical. Sometimes it's for government stakeholders that want to understand community advocacy positions, community advocates that need to understand the constraints of the technology. So it is like a literacy challenge there. I'm second interested in creative writing that actually encourages multi-stakeholder dialogue. This is something I had an award-winning play called Project Amelia that was an immersive theater piece that was basically a chance for different people to come and experience the inside of a tech company, as well as take on different stakeholder roles and an immersive experience about what happens if an AI product is rolled out with high promise and then some things go wrong, and like what should different stakeholders do and feel. And it was almost like a simulation exercise. And the whole goal of that kind of thing is creating these spaces, these common ground spaces that like stories, sci-fi stories and things can offer us culturally more for entertainment, but I'm interested in doing it for education and dialogue. How do we use storytelling? How do we use creative writing to create a space where we agree or change the asymmetry between the technologist who's I'm expert in the technology, the person in the public who's like, I have these interests and values for myself, my family, et cetera. How do we place them in a space where they can have meaningful dialogue about some of these ethical issues? So I'm interested in that. And finally, I'm very interested in empowerment and literacy issues for communities that have traditionally been marginalized by the advancement of technology and not gaining the most benefit. So how do we actually bring things like generative AI and put them out in communities that might not be positioned to get the most benefit? And how can we potentially even that playing field through things like whether it's workshops or whether it's public education efforts, whether it's working with nonprofits or other government service programs to infuse technology literacy and education, and how people are getting that. And some of that's already being piloted. And as I mentioned before, I have a community center that I work with called Community Forge, and we do a lot of that work there. And that's where I translate some of what I do and work on in Carnegie Mellon, and I bring students and different people into the community setting to offer opportunities to get exposed to and learn about cutting edge technologies to people who have not been given traditionally the most access resources and are not being empowered to take advantage of these technologies. I'm interested in that sort of equity move. And I do see it as partly a public communications problem of like people actually getting the right information and being talked to in a way that's like useful for their life circumstances. So yeah, that's who I am and the main things I'll be working on here at Carnegie Mellon. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in following my work or you want to reach out to support the work or collaborate, my email address is mskirpan@cmu.edu. And my current website is mwskirpan.com. I will be in the near future launching a website for that Hopeful Engineering Network, which will contain a lot of these educational resources and different things that I was talking about. Thanks for your time.